I died at 32 in a mansion that felt like a mausoleum, surrounded by luxury I'd never wanted and a husband who treated me like an expensive piece of furniture. My husband Richard had married me for my family's connections, and I'd married him because at 23 I'd been too broken by my first forced marriage to fight back when my parents arranged a second one. My name is Sophie Lynn, and in my previous life, I'd been forced to marry a man my family believed was a poor soldier as punishment for refusing their chosen suitor. My sister Grace had cried and begged to take my place, claiming she loved me too much to see me suffer. My parents, moved by her apparent sacrifice and disgusted by my rebellion, had allowed the switch. Grace married Lieutenant James Chun in a small ceremony, playing the role of noble martyr, while I watched from the sidelines. She'd looked at me with such pitying superiority, touching my hand and whispering, "Don't worry, sister. I'll endure this poverty so you can have a good life." What none of us knew, what I only discovered years later when it was too late, was that Lieutenant James Chun was actually General James Chun, youngest general in the military, heir to the Chun industrial empire, and one of the wealthiest men in the country. He'd hidden his identity to find a wife who'd love him for himself, not his status. Grace had accidentally married into exactly the kind of power and wealth she'd always craved, while thinking she was sacrificing herself. By the time the truth came out, she was already pregnant with his child and playing the devoted military wife perfectly. She never told anyone she'd discovered his real identity, just quietly transitioned from martyred sister to envied socialite. I, meanwhile, had been married off to Richard within a year, my parents eager to salvage my value in the marriage market. And I'd died at 32, having never once stood up for myself, having never once chosen my own path. When I opened my eyes again, I was 23, sitting in my childhood bedroom while my mother lectured me about duty and respect. "You will marry Mr. Thompson as we've arranged," she was saying. "He comes from an excellent family, and this match will benefit everyone." "I won't," I heard myself say, the words from my previous timeline. "I don't love him. I don't even know him." My mother's face flushed with anger. "Love. Don't be ridiculous. Marriage is about family, stability, security, not childish emotions." "Then I still won't do it." This was the moment. The conversation that had changed everything in my previous life. My father would storm in any second, and within an hour, they'd have made their decision about my punishment marriage. Sure enough, my father burst through the door. "What's this I hear about you refusing the Thompson match? I won't marry someone I don't love just to benefit the family business." My father's expression went from angry to ice cold. "Fine. If you won't marry someone of quality, you can marry someone without it. See how you enjoy poverty and hardship. Maybe that will teach you gratitude." "Mr. Lin, please," my mother started. "No. She wants to choose feelings over sense? Let her live with the consequences. I'll find her someone completely unsuitable. Someone poor, someone with no prospects, someone who'll show her exactly what life is like without family support." He stormed out. My mother looked at me with disappointment and followed him. I sat alone in my room, my heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment that led to Grace taking my place, to her accidentally marrying into wealth, while I was pushed toward Richard. But this time I knew the truth. And this time I had a plan. The next morning, my father announced his decision at breakfast. "I've arranged a marriage for Sophie, Lieutenant James Chun from the military. He has no family money, no connections, nothing but his military salary. She'll marry him in 2 weeks." Grace, my younger sister who'd been picking at her food, looked up with perfectly calculated shock. "Father, you can't be serious. That's too harsh." "It's decided." "But Sophie," Grace turned to me with those big, sympathetic eyes I now recognized as completely fake. "Sophie, you can't marry someone like that. You'll be miserable. You'll have no money, no status. You'll live in some tiny military housing." "I'll be fine," I said calmly. Grace blinked. In our previous timeline, I'd been devastated, terrified, begging my parents to reconsider. My fear had made Grace's eventual sacrifice seem even more noble. This time I showed nothing. "Sophie, I don't think you understand," Grace continued, her voice taking on that noble, self-sacrificing tone. "Military wives live very difficult lives. The constant moving, the long deployments, the danger, the poverty. I said I'll be fine. My mother was watching me suspiciously. You're being very calm about this. What's the point in arguing? Father's made his decision. I'll make the best of it. This wasn't what they'd expected. They'd expected tears, begging, drama. My calm acceptance was throwing off their script. Grace especially looked unsettled. She'd been prepared to play the noble sister saving me from disaster. But if I wasn't devastated, her sacrifice wouldn't seem as grand. Over the next few days, Grace tried multiple times to engage me in conversations about how terrible my upcoming marriage would be. I read about military housing, she said one afternoon, finding me in the garden. It's tiny, Sophie. Like one-bedroom apartments with paper-thin walls. And military salaries are so low. You'll have to budget everything, no more shopping, no more nice restaurants. I'll adjust. But you don't have to. Grace's voice took on urgency. I could talk to Father. Maybe if I explained how unfair this is. Don't bother. Sophie, I'm trying to help you. Are you? I looked at her directly. Or are you trying to make yourself feel important? Grace's eyes widened with hurt. How can you say that? I'm your sister. I love you. I can't stand seeing you being punished like this. In my previous life, I'd believed her. I'd thought her tears and concern were genuine. Now I saw the calculation behind it. She was building up to her grand gesture, making sure everyone knew how much she cared so her eventual sacrifice would seem even more selfless. If you really want to help, I said, you could marry Lieutenant Chin yourself. Grace went very still. What? You're so concerned about me suffering. You keep talking about how terrible it will be. If you're that worried, you could offer to take my place. I couldn't ask Father to change his mind again. He's already angry. I'm not asking you to. I'm just saying if you really cared that much, that would be an option. I walked away, leaving Grace standing in the garden looking confused and cornered. That evening at dinner, Grace made her move. Father, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I've been thinking about Sophie's situation, and I can't bear it. I know she made a mistake in refusing Mr. Thompson, but the punishment seems so harsh. The matter is settled, my father said coldly. I know. But, Grace took a deep breath, tears forming in her eyes. What if I married Lieutenant Chin instead? Sophie could stay here unmarried, and I would take on the burden of the difficult marriage. I know it's unconventional, but I can't stand to see my sister suffer. My mother gasped. Grace, that's very noble of you, but... Please, Grace interrupted, now crying openly. I love Sophie so much. Let me do this for her. Let me be the one to make the sacrifice. My father studied Grace for a long moment. I kept my expression neutral, eating my dinner as if this drama wasn't happening. Sophie, my father said finally, your sister is offering to take your place. Do you accept? In my previous timeline, I'd been so grateful, so relieved. I'd hugged Grace and cried and thanked her profusely. This time I put down my fork and said, if Grace wants to marry Lieutenant Chun, that's her choice. I'm prepared to honor the arrangement Father made, but if she insists, I won't stop her. The room went silent. My reaction was all wrong. I was supposed to be grateful, relieved, emotional. Grace looked lost. Sophie, I'm doing this for you. Are you? Or are you doing it for yourself so everyone will think you're noble and self-sacrificing? Sophie, my mother exclaimed, your sister is offering to save you from a terrible situation, and you're being cruel about it? I'm being honest. Grace has been talking about how awful my marriage will be for days. She's built it up as the worst possible fate. And now she's offering to take it on herself? If it's really that terrible, why would someone who loves me volunteer for it? Unless she's more interested in looking like a martyr than actually helping me. Grace's tears stopped abruptly, replaced by a flash of anger she quickly hid. I can't believe you'd think that of me. Then marry him, I said simply. If your offer is genuine, marry Lieutenant Chen. I won't stand in your way. My father looked between us, clearly trying to understand the dynamic. Grace, are you certain about this? Grace had no choice now. She'd painted herself into a corner. If she backed out after that speech, she'd look insincere. If she went through with it, She'd get what she thought was a punishment marriage. I'm certain, she said, straightening her spine. I'll marry Lieutenant Chen. For Sophie. Then it's settled, my father said. Grace will marry the lieutenant in 2 weeks. After dinner, Grace cornered me in the hallway. Why did you do that? I was trying to help you. Were you? Because it looked like you were trying to make yourself the center of attention, by playing the suffering saint. I was sacrificing my future for you. You were volunteering for something you spent days telling me was terrible and unbearable. If you really thought it was that bad, you wouldn't have offered. Which means either you were lying about how bad it is, or you're lying about doing this for me. Grace's perfect mask cracked. You're being incredibly ungrateful. I never asked you to do this. You offered. Enthusiastically. Almost like you wanted to. Why would I want to marry a poor soldier? I don't know, Grace. Why would you? She had no answer for that. Because the truth was, she didn't want to marry a poor soldier. She wanted to be seen as someone noble enough to sacrifice herself for her sister. She wanted the social credit, the sympathy, the image of being so loving and selfless. The actual marriage was supposed to be my burden, not hers. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Grace prepare for her wedding with growing panic barely hidden beneath her martyred saint routine. I'm doing this for you, she reminded me constantly. I hope you appreciate the sacrifice I'm making. I do appreciate it, I'd reply. You're taking on something you described as terrible and unbearable. That's very brave. Each time I said it, Grace looked a little more cornered. The wedding was small, as my father had intended for my punishment marriage. Grace wore a simple dress and cried through the ceremony. Not from emotion, but from the dawning realization that she'd trapped herself in exactly what she'd claimed to be saving me from. Lieutenant James Chun was tall, handsome, and utterly impassive throughout the ceremony. He'd agreed to the arranged marriage for reasons of his own, and he showed no emotion about marrying Grace instead of me. After the ceremony, as Grace prepared to leave with her new husband, she pulled me aside. You could still fix this, she whispered urgently. You could tell Father you've changed your mind, that you want to take your place back. Why would I do that? You were so insistent that you wanted to save me from this terrible fate. Sophie, please. Enjoy your marriage, Grace. You fought so hard for it. I watched them drive away in Lieutenant Chen's modest car, Grace's face pale with suppressed panic. My mother approached me. You should be more grateful to your sister. I am grateful. She got exactly what she wanted. Everyone's admiration for her noble sacrifice. What more could she ask for? Over the next 6 months, I rebuilt my life. Without the pressure of an unwanted marriage, I enrolled in business courses. I started volunteering at a nonprofit. I made friends who valued me for myself, not my family connections. And I watched from a distance as Grace tried to play the role of struggling military wife. She posted constantly on social media about the challenges of her sacrifice, about how hard military life was, about how much she missed her comfortable life. She made sure everyone knew she was suffering, but not suffering enough to actually look unhappy. My mother would report updates. Grace is adjusting so well to her new life. She's being so brave about the small apartment and the tight budget. James seems like a good man even if he is poor. I just nodded and said nothing. 3 months into the marriage, I ran into an old family friend at a charity event, Mrs. Wang, whose husband was a major general. Sophie, how lovely to see you. I heard about your sister's noble sacrifice, marrying that young lieutenant. Yes, Grace was very insistent about it. Well, she certainly got more than she bargained for, Mrs. Wang said with a knowing smile. What do you mean? Oh, you don't know? I suppose they're keeping it quiet. But Lieutenant Chun, well, he's not quite what he seems. My heart rate increased even though I'd known this was coming. What do you mean? My husband mentioned that young Chun is actually General Chen's son. The General Chun who owns half the manufacturing sector in this province. Apparently, the boy wanted to find a wife who'd love him for himself, so he hid his background. Smart of him, really. Too many gold diggers out there. I see. Your sister must have been shocked when she found out. Or perhaps she doesn't know yet. It's all very hush-hush. The family wants to see if the marriage is genuine before they publicly acknowledge the connection. After Mrs. Wong moved on, I stood very still, processing this information. Grace didn't know yet. She was still playing martyred military wife, thinking she'd sacrifice herself for nothing. But she'd find out eventually. And when she did, she'd realize she'd accidentally married into exactly the kind of wealth and status she'd always craved. The thought made me feel nothing but cold satisfaction. Not because I wanted the marriage myself, I truly didn't. But because Grace had schemed and manipulated to look noble, while secretly hoping to avoid the marriage entirely. And now she was trapped in exactly what she'd pretended to want. For months into Grace's marriage, my mother called me urgently. "Sophie, you need to come home. There's been a development." At home, I found my parents in the living room looking shell-shocked. My father stood up when I entered. "Do you know who your sister married? Lieutenant James Chun? General James Chen's son. Heir to the Chun fortune. One of the wealthiest families in the country." I let appropriate surprise cross my face. "What? We just found out." Grace apparently discovered it a few weeks ago and didn't tell anyone. But now the Chun family is making their connection public, and Grace. My mother's voice dropped. Grace is playing the perfect wife, acting like she knew all along. "I don't understand." My father's expression was hard. "Your sister volunteered for what she thought was a punishment marriage. She spent weeks telling everyone how she was sacrificing herself. And now it turns out she married into wealth and power that surpasses even the Thompson family. She got lucky. Did she?" My father looked at me shrewdly. "Or did she know something? How could she have known? You arranged the marriage. Lieutenant Chen hid his identity from everyone. Then why did she fight so hard to take your place? She told you why. She said she loved me too much to see me suffer." The irony hung in the air. Grace had claimed noble motivation while secretly hoping to avoid the marriage. Instead, she'd gotten exactly what she'd always wanted while appearing selfless. My mother cleared her throat. "The Chun family is hosting a formal introduction dinner next week. We're all invited. You'll need to attend." Of course. The dinner was held at the Chun family mansion, a sprawling estate that made our family home look modest. Grace presided over it like she'd been born to wealth, wearing designer clothes and expensive jewelry, laughing with the ease of someone completely in her element. She found me on the terrace before dinner. "Sophie, I'm so glad you could come." Her voice was bright, but there was an edge to it. "Isn't this amazing? Can you believe how things turned out? It's very fortunate for you. I didn't know you understand. I really thought I was marrying a poor soldier. I was genuinely sacrificing for you." This was important to her. That I believe her original motivation was pure, even though we both knew it wasn't. "Of course you didn't know," I said. "You spent weeks telling everyone how terrible military life would be. You were very convincing about the poverty and hardship." Grace's smile tightened. "I was just being realistic about military salaries. And then you volunteered to endure it all anyway. Very noble. I did it for you. And now you have wealth and status beyond anything our family could have arranged. Funny how things work out." "Are you saying I planned this? Because I didn't. I'm not saying anything. I'm just observing that you got exactly what you've always wanted while appearing to sacrifice yourself. It's quite elegant, really." Grace's mask slipped. "You don't know anything about what I wanted. Don't I? You've always cared about status, appearances being the center of attention. And now you're General Chen's daughter-in-law. You went from martyred sister to envied socialite in 4 months. Must be exhausting keeping up the performance." "There's no performance. I love my husband." "I'm sure you do." Now, Grace opened her mouth to respond, but Lieutenant Chun, General Chun, appeared at her side. "Darling, they're asking for us inside." Up close, James Chun was even more imposing. Tall, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. He looked at me with polite curiosity. "You must be Sophie, Grace's sister." "I am. The one Grace sacrificed so much to save." There was something in his tone, not quite mockery but close. "That's what she tells everyone." His lips quirked slightly. "Indeed. We should go in, darling." As they walked away, Grace glanced back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear? Anger? Guilt? During dinner, I watched Grace perform for the Chin family. She was charming, gracious, playing the perfect wife and daughter-in-law. No one would guess she'd spent the first months of her marriage complaining about poverty and sacrifice. But I noticed something else. James watched his wife with the same polite distance he showed everyone. There was no warmth, no affection, no intimacy. He was courteous but cold. Grace noticed too. I saw her trying to engage him, touching his arm, laughing at his minimal responses, working harder and harder to get a reaction. He gave her nothing. After dinner, my father pulled me aside. I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. All right. Did you know who Lieutenant Chin really was when you let Grace take your place? I met his eyes steadily. How could I have known? You arranged the marriage as punishment. The whole point was that he was poor and unsuitable. But you were very calm about it. Very accepting. Not at all what we expected. What did you expect? Tears and begging? Would that have changed your mind? No. Then why bother? I accepted the consequence of my choice. Grace decided to interfere. I didn't ask her to. My father studied me for a long moment. Sometimes I wonder if you're more clever than you appear. Or maybe I'm just adaptable. He had no response to that. Over the next year, I watched Grace's marriage from a distance. She maintained the public image of a perfect life, but cracks began to show. James remained distant. He was polite, provided for her generously, attended social functions with her, but there was no warmth between them. He treated her like a business arrangement, which is exactly what their marriage was. Grace tried everything to get closer to him. She redecorated their house. She threw elaborate parties. She involved herself in his business interests. Nothing worked. The problem was simple. James had married Grace thinking she was someone who'd chosen him despite believing he was poor. Someone who'd sacrificed comfort for love. Instead, he'd gotten someone who'd schemed to look noble while secretly hoping to avoid the marriage entirely. And once he'd realized his wealth, she'd transformed into the perfect society wife, proving that her interest was in his status, not him. He couldn't prove she'd known about his background from the start. But he knew she hadn't married him for love. And that knowledge poisoned everything. Meanwhile, I'd started my own business, a consulting firm focused on helping nonprofits with strategic planning. It was modest but growing, and it was entirely mine. I met someone too. Daniel Park was a professor at the university, specializing in social policy. He was kind, intelligent, and had absolutely no interest in my family's money or connections. He loved me for myself, and I loved him for the same reason. We'd been dating for 8 months when Grace showed up at my apartment unannounced. I need to talk to you. I let her in. She looked immaculate as always, but there was something brittle in her expression. I'm pregnant, she said without preamble. Congratulations. James barely reacted when I told him. He said that's good, and went back to reading his newspaper. I said nothing. Do you know what it's like? Grace's voice broke. To have everything I ever wanted and feel nothing but empty? I live in a mansion. I wear designer clothes. I attend galas with the most powerful people in the country. And I'm miserable. Then leave. I can't. I'm pregnant. And even if I wasn't, where would I go? Back to our parents? They'd never forgive me for walking away from the Chin family. Stay here and be the perfect wife to a man who treats me like furniture. You made your choice, Grace. I didn't know. I thought I was being noble, sacrificing for you. You thought you were being clever. You wanted everyone to think you were noble while secretly hoping father would change his mind about the marriage entirely. You never actually intended to go through with it. Grace stared at me. How did you? Because I know you. You've always been more interested in appearing good than actually being good. And this time, your performance trapped you in exactly what you were pretending to want. You could have warned me, she whispered. You knew, didn't you? When Mrs. Wong told you about James's real identity, you knew what was going to happen. I suspected. And you said nothing. You let me marry him knowing. Knowing what? That you'd accidentally get wealth and status beyond your wildest dreams? That you'd have to live with the consequences of your own scheme? Yes, I let that happen. Why? Because you didn't marry James to save me, Grace. You married him to look like a hero. And now you're getting exactly what heroes get. A story that sounds better than it feels. Grace's perfect composure cracked. He knows. James knows I didn't marry him for the right reasons. He can't prove it, but he knows. And he punishes me for it every day with his cold politeness, his emotional distance. I'm his wife in name only. Have you tried actually loving him? How can I love someone who looks at me like I'm a stranger? Who gives me everything materially and nothing emotionally? Maybe that's all you've earned from him. Grace flinched. You're cruel. I'm honest. You wanted the appearance of nobility without the substance. You wanted credit for sacrifice without actually sacrificing. And now you have a marriage that looks perfect from the outside and feels hollow from the inside. That's not cruelty, that's consequence. I'm your sister. Yes. And I'm the sister you pitted publicly while secretly congratulating yourself for avoiding her fate. Except it wasn't her fate, it was yours. You just didn't know it yet. Grace left without another word. I felt no satisfaction in her pain. But I felt no guilt either. Grace had made her choices based on calculation and image, and now she was living with the results. The irony was perfect. She'd gotten everything she'd always wanted and found it empty. Meanwhile, I'd lost the prize marriage and found genuine happiness. 6 months later, Grace gave birth to a son. The Chun family celebrated publicly, and James played the proud father for the cameras. But friends who'd attended the private hospital visit reported that he'd stayed for exactly 1 hour, held the baby for one photo, and then left to return to work. Grace's social media posts showed a perfect family. The reality, according to my mother who visited regularly, was that Grace lived in a beautiful prison with a husband who provided everything except affection, and a child who was already being groomed as the Chun heir. Meanwhile, Daniel proposed to me on a rainy Tuesday after we'd spent the evening cooking dinner together in his small apartment. No grand gesture, no expensive ring, just genuine love and partnership. I said yes without hesitation. My parents were disappointed. Daniel was a professor, comfortable but not wealthy, with no family connections or social status. They'd hoped I'd eventually marry someone suitable. After Grace married so well, we'd thought you'd want something similar, my mother said. Grace married for status and got emptiness, I replied. I'm marrying for love. Love doesn't pay for security. No. But my business does. And Daniel's career does. We'll be fine. My father studied me. You really don't regret how things turned out? Grace has everything. Grace has the appearance of everything. There's a difference. You could have had that too. If you'd married Lieutenant Chun as originally planned. I would have been just as miserable as Grace is now. Possibly more so, since I would have actually tried to make the marriage work instead of just playing the role. You're saying Grace isn't trying? I'm saying Grace is performing. And James knows it. That's why their marriage is so cold. The wedding was small, intimate, everything Grace's wedding to James hadn't been. Just close friends, genuine love, real joy. Grace attended, heavily pregnant with her second child, her smile perfect and her eyes empty. You look happy, she said at the reception. I am. Daniel seems nice. He is. Not wealthy though. No. But that's not why I married him. Grace's hand went to her stomach. I remember when I thought that's what mattered most. Marrying for love instead of money or status. You still could have. Could I? Grace looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, raw honesty. When I married James, I thought I was being noble. But really, I was being calculating. I wanted credit for sacrifice without actually sacrificing. And he saw through it. He's always seen through it. And now I'm trapped in a marriage where I have everything except the one thing that actually matters, being loved. You could try actually loving him. I do love him. Now. After 2 years of living with him, watching him be quietly kind to everyone but cold to me, seeing him be a distant but responsible father, I actually love him. But it's too late. He'll never believe it's real. Have you told him? 100 times. He says thank you like I've complimented his tie, and then he goes back to whatever he's doing. Grace's voice cracked. I got exactly what I wanted, Sophie. And it's everything I deserve. After she left, Daniel found me on the terrace. Your sister seems sad. She is. Do you feel bad for her? No. She made her choices. She's living with them. That's harsh. Is it? She schemed to look noble, accidentally married into wealth, and now she's miserable because her husband knows she didn't marry him for love. Those are consequences, not cruelty. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Did you know? When you let her take your place. I suspected James wasn't what he seemed. I didn't know for certain, but I suspected. And you let her walk into it anyway. She volunteered enthusiastically. I just didn't stop her. Why? Because Grace has spent our entire lives manipulating situations to make herself look good. She needed to learn that appearances and reality aren't the same thing. That getting what you appear to want isn't the same as getting what you actually need. And have you learned anything? I looked at Daniel, at this man who'd chosen me without knowing my family background, who'd proposed without a grand gesture, who loved me for exactly who I was. Yes. I learned that the life that looks perfect from outside is often hollow inside, and that the life that looks ordinary from outside can be everything you actually need. 3 years into Grace's marriage, the truth finally came out. James filed for divorce. The stated reason was irreconcilable differences. The reality, according to the whispered gossip that reached me through mutual acquaintances, was that James had finally had enough of living with someone who'd married him under false pretenses. He was generous in the divorce settlement. Grace got the house, significant alimony, full custody of their 2 sons with generous visitation rights for him. He was, as always, scrupulously fair and completely cold. Grace moved back to our city, to a beautiful home James purchased for her, and tried to rebuild her image as a tragic figure. The noble sister who'd sacrificed herself for her family, only to have her marriage fall apart through no fault of her own. But people remembered. They remembered her social media posts about her sacrifice. They remembered how quickly she'd embraced her wealth once it was revealed. They remembered the perfect family image that had hidden a hollow reality. Grace became exactly what she'd always feared. A divorced woman with children, living on her ex-husband's money, with a reputation that was complicated rather than admirable. She tried to reconnect with me several times. Long phone calls where she'd cry about how unfair everything was, how James had never given her a real chance, how she'd really tried to make the marriage work. I listened without offering comfort. You knew, she said one night, her voice thick with tears. When you let me take your place, you knew it would end like this. I knew you weren't marrying James for the right reasons. I knew that starting a marriage with deception and calculation would eventually lead to pain. I didn't know exactly how it would unfold. You could have warned me. Would you have listened? You were too invested in playing the noble martyr. You'd convinced yourself that you were sacrificing for me, even though we both knew you were really hoping to avoid the marriage entirely. I was trying to help you. You were trying to look like you were helping me. There's a difference. I hate you sometimes, Grace said quietly. Do you know that? I hate that you were right, that you saw through me, that you got the simple, genuine life I dismissed and ended up happier than me. I don't hate you, Grace. I just don't feel responsible for your choices anymore. Don't you feel anything? I'm your sister. I'm miserable. Doesn't that matter to you? You're miserable because you spent your life chasing appearances instead of authenticity. That's not something I did to you. That's something you did to yourself. And feeling guilty about your consequences won't help either of us. Grace hung up. We didn't speak for 6 months after that. 5 years after the divorce, Grace remarried. A wealthy businessman who valued her social skills and connections. She seemed content, if not happy, playing the role of society wife once again. James never remarried. He focused on his career, his children during his visitation times, and various philanthropic endeavors. According to mutual acquaintances, he'd become even more guarded, even less likely to trust anyone's motivations. Grace had damaged him in ways that would take years to heal, if they ever healed at all. As for me, Daniel and I built a life together that was ordinary and extraordinary at once. We bought a modest house. We had 2 daughters. My business grew steadily. His career flourished. We were happy in ways that had nothing to do with status or appearances, and everything to do with genuine partnership. On my 32nd birthday, the age I'd died in my previous timeline, Daniel surprised me with a small party. Just close friends, our children, simple celebration. Grace came, with her new husband and her sons from her first marriage. She looked well polished, playing her role perfectly. Happy birthday, Sophie. Thank you for coming. I wouldn't miss it. She paused. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? If I hadn't taken your place, if you'd married James instead? Sometimes. Do you regret how it turned out? I looked around the room. At Daniel laughing with our friends, at our daughters playing with Grace's sons. At the life I'd built that was so different from the one I'd lost in my previous timeline. No, I said honestly. I don't regret any of it. Even though I got the wealthy husband and the mansion and the status. Even though I got everything we were raised to want. You got the appearance of everything we were raised to want. I got the reality of what I actually needed. Those aren't the same thing. Grace looked at me for a long moment. I still don't understand how you knew. How you saw through everything when I couldn't see it myself. I didn't know everything. I just knew that chasing appearances leads to emptiness. And that genuine happiness comes from being authentic, even when it looks ordinary from the outside. You sound so wise. Like you've lived this all before. I smiled slightly. Maybe I'm just a quick learner. Grace's new husband called for her, and she excused herself. I watched her go. This sister who'd accidentally gotten everything she'd schemed for and found it hollow. Later that evening, after everyone had left, Daniel and I sat on our back porch while our daughters slept inside. Your sister still seems lost, he observed. She's always been lost. She just hides it better now. Do you think she'll ever find what she's looking for? I don't know. Grace has spent so long performing for others that I'm not sure she knows who she is without an audience. Daniel took my hand. And you? Do you know who you are? Yes. I'm someone who chose authenticity over appearance. Someone who learned that the worst outcome isn't being punished, it's being rewarded for the wrong reasons. That's very philosophical. Grace married James thinking she was being noble. And it turned out to be the beginning of her unhappiness. I avoided that marriage thinking I was dodging a punishment, and it turned out to be the beginning of my happiness. The universe has a sense of irony. 6 years after Grace's divorce from James, I received an unexpected call from James himself. Sophie, this is James Chun. I hope you don't mind me calling. Not at all. Is everything all right? Yes. I'm actually calling because I wanted to ask you something, and I thought you'd be honest with me. Okay. Did you know who I was? When your father arranged the marriage, did you know I wasn't actually poor? I considered lying, then decided James deserved honesty. I suspected you were more than you appeared. I didn't know specifics, but I suspected. And you let Grace take your place anyway. Grace volunteered enthusiastically. I simply didn't stop her. James was quiet for a moment. Did you suspect what would happen? That she'd married me for the wrong reasons. I knew Grace. I knew she cared about appearances and status. I suspected that once she discovered your real identity, she'd embrace the wealth while maintaining the fiction that she'd married you out of noble sacrifice. You could have warned me. Could I have? Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was a jealous sister trying to sabotage her noble gesture? Another pause. You're right. I wouldn't have believed you. I was too focused on finding someone who'd choose me despite believing I was poor. The irony is that Grace did choose me despite believing I was poor, but for all the wrong reasons. She wanted to look noble. She got exactly what she was performing for, and it trapped her. It trapped both of us, James said quietly. I spent 5 years married to someone who loved my wealth but not me. And now I can't trust anyone's motivations. Every woman I meet, I wonder if she's another Grace, performing care to access my status. That must be exhausting. It is. Which is why I'm calling. I wanted to ask, why didn't you fight to keep the marriage? When Grace volunteered, you could have refused. You could have insisted on honoring your father's arrangement. Why didn't you? Because I didn't want to marry someone as punishment. And because I saw an opportunity to let Grace trap herself in her own performance. That's quite ruthless. Is it? Or is it just allowing someone to experience the natural consequences of their choices? James laughed, a short, surprised sound. You're very different from your sister. I know. If things had been different, if I'd married you instead of Grace, do you think it would have worked? No. You were looking for someone to love you despite your perceived poverty. I would have suspected your real situation, and that suspicion would have always been between us. Just like Grace's deception was between you two. So there was no winning. Not in an arranged marriage designed as punishment. The whole foundation was wrong. And yet your sister got exactly what she'd always wanted. The appearance of what she'd always wanted. The reality was hollow. That's the lesson, James. What looks perfect from outside is often empty inside. Is that why you married a professor? To avoid the trap your sister fell into. I married Daniel because I love him. His profession and modest income are incidental. Grace married you for status while performing nobility. I married Daniel for partnership while accepting ordinary. Those are very different foundations. You sound happy. I am. Good. James paused. I'm glad one of us escaped that situation intact. After we hung up, I sat thinking about the conversation. James had been damaged by Grace's deception in ways that would likely affect him for life. He'd wanted genuine love and gotten calculated performance. The scars from that betrayal ran deep. Grace, meanwhile, had gotten everything she'd always wanted and found it empty. She'd learned that appearances and reality were different things. But the lesson had cost her years of unhappiness. And I'd been given a second chance at life and used it to choose authenticity over performance. I'd lost the prize marriage and gained genuine happiness. 7 years after Grace's divorce, she published a memoir, The Other Side of Nobility, a cautionary tale. In it, she was brutally honest about her motivations for taking my place, about discovering James's wealth, about the hollow years of her marriage. She wrote about the price of performing for others, about the emptiness of getting everything you thought you wanted. The book became a bestseller. Readers praised her honesty. Critics called it a timely examination of social pressure and authentic versus performative virtue. Grace became a speaker, a commentator, someone known for her candid discussions of the gap between appearance and reality. She'd turned her greatest failure into a new kind of success. This time built on genuine reflection rather than calculated performance. I read the book in one sitting. Grace had included me throughout, painting an honest picture of our dynamic. She wrote about my calm acceptance of the arranged marriage, about my lack of resistance when she volunteered to take my place, about her dawning realization that I'd seen through her performance all along. My sister knew, she wrote in the final chapter. She knew I was performing nobility rather than being noble. She knew I was chasing appearances rather than meaning. And she let me walk into the consequences of my own choices. At the time, I thought she was cruel. Now I understand she was giving me the greatest gift possible. The chance to learn who I was beneath the performance. It took me years to unwrap that gift. But I'm finally here. She sent me an advance copy with a note. Thank you for letting me fall. It was the only way I'd learned to stand on my own. I called her after reading it. The book is honest, I said. Too honest, according to some people. Mother was horrified. Father said I'd embarrassed the family. And James. He sent me a note saying it was brave. That's the first kind thing he said to me in 8 years. How did that feel? Terrifying. Like maybe there's a chance at redemption, but I'm not sure I deserve it. Do you want redemption from James? Or are you performing wanting it? Grace laughed. That's the question, isn't it? I've spent so long performing that I'm not always sure what's real anymore. But I'm working on it. Therapy, honest writing, actually examining my motivations instead of just going with whatever makes me look best. That's growth. It's exhausting is what it is. Being authentic is so much harder than performing. No wonder I avoided it for so long. But worth it. Ask me in a few more years. Right now I'm still in the awkward stage where I'm catching myself mid-performance and having to course correct. It's not graceful. Grace doesn't have to be graceful. It just has to be real. She was quiet for a moment. Did you plan this? When you let me take your place, did you plan for all of this to happen? I planned to avoid a marriage I didn't want. Everything else was just natural consequences playing out. I trapped myself. Yes. And you let me. Yes. I can't decide if that makes you kind or cruel. Maybe it's both. Or maybe it's neither. Maybe it's just honest. 8 years after everything began, my parents finally acknowledged what had happened. My father called me to his study, the same room where he'd announced my arranged marriage in my previous timeline. I need to apologize, he said without preamble, for the way I handled your refusal of the Thompson match, for arranging a punishment marriage, for allowing Grace to manipulate the situation. Allowing? I knew she wasn't being purely noble. I could see she was performing. But I was angry at you, and it seemed like poetic justice. Let her take the punishment she claimed to want to avoid. You knew she didn't really want to marry him? I suspected. Just like I suspected you knew more than you were saying about Lieutenant Chen's real identity. I didn't know for certain. But you suspected. And you let her walk into it. She volunteered enthusiastically. I just didn't stop her. My father smiled slightly. You're more like me than I realized. Strategic. Willing to let people experience consequences instead of rescuing them. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. And an apology. I used marriage as punishment, and it backfired on everyone. Grace got what she thought she wanted and found it empty. James got a wife who didn't love him. You got pushed away from the family. Nobody won. I won, I said quietly. I got away from a forced marriage and built a life I actually wanted. I got to choose my own path instead of following yours. With a professor instead of someone from a prominent family. With someone I love instead of someone who looks good on paper. My father was quiet for a long moment. You're happy? Very. Then I suppose that's something. He cleared his throat. Your mother wants you to know that you're welcome at family events again. Not that you were unwelcome exactly, but I wasn't performing the role of dutiful daughter, so I was tolerated rather than embraced. Yes. And we realize now that was wrong. Grace's book made us examine our own role in everything that happened. We pushed both of you toward performance instead of authenticity. And now we're trying to do better. It's awkward and we're not good at it yet, but we're trying. I thought about my previous timeline, where I'd died at 32 without ever having this conversation, where my parents had remained disappointed in me forever, where I'd lived my entire life trying to meet their expectations and failing. I appreciate that, I said. And I'll come to family events. But on my terms, not yours. Understood. 9 years after Grace took my place, James remarried. His new wife was a military doctor he'd met during a deployment consultation. She was brilliant, dedicated, and had no idea who he was when they met. She'd been too busy saving lives to pay attention to society pages. Grace attended the wedding with her second husband and her sons. She seemed genuinely happy for James, which I thought might be her most authentic moment yet. She's perfect for him, Grace told me at the reception. Smart, genuine, completely uninterested in his money. Everything I wasn't. You were young. You didn't know who you were yet. I was old enough to know that performing nobility wasn't the same as being noble. But I did it anyway because appearances mattered more than truth. And now I'm trying to live honestly. It's harder and less glamorous, but it's real. Grace paused. Do you think he'll be happy this time? I think he has a better chance with someone who chose him authentically rather than someone who performed choosing him. That's what I thought too. Grace smiled slightly. It's strange, isn't it? I got exactly what I schemed for. Wealth, status, the envy of everyone who knew me. And it was hollow. Then I lost it, wrote about losing it, and found something more real in the honesty than I ever found in the performance. That's growth. It's expensive growth. I lost years to performance before I learned to be real. Better late than never. Grace looked at me thoughtfully. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd married James? If I hadn't taken your place? Sometimes. But I think it would have ended the same way. James wanted someone to love him despite poverty. I would have suspected his wealth from the start. That suspicion would have poisoned everything, just like your calculated nobility poisoned your marriage to him. So there was no winning. Not in a marriage designed as punishment. The only winning move was not to play. Which you managed by letting me play for you. I didn't make you volunteer, Grace. You did that yourself. Because I wanted to look noble. And you succeeded. Everyone thought you were incredibly selfless. You got exactly what you performed for. And then I had to live with the reality of it. Grace shook her head. You're very clever, Sophie. Or very lucky. Maybe both. 10 years after everything began, Daniel and I celebrated our 8th anniversary. Our daughters were in school, my business was thriving, his career had advanced to full professor. We'd built a life that was ordinary in the best possible way. Grace had found success with her honesty, becoming a sought-after speaker and writer about authenticity versus performance. Her second marriage seemed solid, built on genuine compatibility rather than status-seeking. James had found happiness with his doctor wife, who loved him for himself and had no interest in society games. They were expecting their first child together. And I'd been given a second chance at life and used it to choose authenticity over appearance, partnership over status, reality over performance. On our anniversary, Daniel asked me the question he'd asked before. Do you ever regret how things turned out? No. I got exactly what I needed by losing what everyone thought I should want. That's very philosophical. Grace married for appearances and got emptiness. James married for authenticity and got betrayal. I avoided both traps by simply being honest about not wanting an arranged marriage. Even though it meant losing your family's approval. Approval based on performance isn't real approval. It's just a conditional agreement to maintain appearances. Daniel pulled me close. I'm glad you chose reality over performance. So am I. That night, I had a dream about my previous timeline. About dying at 32, exhausted and alone, having spent my entire life trying to meet other people's expectations. About never once choosing my own path or building my own happiness. I woke up grateful, not just for the second chance, but for having the wisdom to use it well. Grace had gotten the mansion, the wealth, the status, everything our parents had raised us to want. And she'd found it empty. I'd gotten the ordinary life, the modest house, the simple happiness. And I'd found it full. That was the truth that had collapsed Grace when she finally understood it. The life that looks perfect from outside is often hollow inside. And the life that looks ordinary from outside can be everything you actually need. She cried to marry the poor man I was forced to wed, thinking she was being noble while secretly hoping to avoid the marriage entirely. Instead, she'd trapped herself in wealth without love, status without authenticity, appearance without substance. And the truth, that she'd gotten exactly what she'd schemed for while I'd gotten exactly what I'd needed, had collapsed her entire worldview. It had taken her years to rebuild herself on a foundation of honesty instead of performance. But she'd done it. And in doing so, she'd finally understood what I'd known all along. The worst outcome isn't being punished. It's being rewarded for the wrong reasons. Grace had been rewarded for her performance of nobility, and paid the price in years of emptiness. I'd been punished for my honesty and received the gift of building an authentic life. In the end, we'd both gotten exactly what we deserved, not in the sense of cosmic justice, but in the sense of natural consequences. Grace had performed and gotten performance in return. I'd been honest and gotten authenticity in return. The universe had a sense of irony, but also a sense of balance. And I'd learned the most important lesson of my 2 lifetimes. Choose authenticity over appearance, even when it looks like you're losing. Because the prize you think you want might be the trap you need to avoid. And the punishment you're trying to escape might be the freedom you actually need. Grace cried to marry the poor man I was forced to wed. And in doing so, she trapped herself in the golden cage she'd always desired while setting me free to build the authentic life I actually needed. That was the truth that had collapsed her. And the same truth that had saved me.